When do comma-separated lists of objects arise in Matlab expressions? Well, there are three instances. First is multiple input arguments to functions. Here we have the function rand_n, which accepts two arguments. Notice that it is a comma-separated list of objects. In this case, two objects, one comma. Analogously, multiple output arguments from a function also use the comma-separated list. Here on the output side, we see two output arguments separated by a comma. Finally, the square bracket syntax for horizontal concatenation uses comma-separated lists, where the objects to be concatenated are separated by commas. Of course, that really just generates a call to horsecat, which shows that this is just a special case of the multi-input argument function, comma-separated list. And horsecat is not unique. Vertical concatenation, while it can be done with the square brackets and semicolons, can also be done through a function call. So even vertical concatenation can be performed with comma-separated lists. What we're going to learn about over the next few slides is the tight connection between cell arrays and struct arrays and comma-separated lists. Let's start with the connection between comma-separated lists and field references of struct objects. Recall our struct array student, which contained Fred, Esme, and Sal's names, student ID numbers, and test scores. Matlab defines the reference student.Scores as this, which is precisely the scores field of the first element of the struct array with a comma, the scores field of the second element of the struct array and another comma, and finally the scores field of the third element. Based on the data that is in student, the expression student.Scores is identical to, and all I've listed here is the 1x4 arrays of each of the scores, and I have them separated by commas. Notice that it is a comma-separated list of objects. So Matlab defines a field reference of a struct array as just shorthand for a comma-separated list of the elements of the array. Here, the array had three elements, which is why we have three objects separated by two commas. A scalar struct, which is what we learned about at first, a structure that only had one element, when we make a reference to its field, it's one element, and therefore there's no commas, as we initially learned. It's just a normal field reference. Now, a comma-separated list is not an object. It's not a double, it's not a char, a cell, or a struct. So it can't be assigned to a variable, but it can be used to build valid expressions. Let's go over the three instances in which comma-separated lists arise in Matlab and see how student.Scores is interpreted in each case. As an input argument to a function, it expands to three input arguments. Here it appears that my function is being called with two input arguments, but student.Scores is actually expanded to a comma-separated list of the scores field of all the array elements. Therefore, this is the actual call to my function. Next, as an output argument. Here, some function appears to be called with two output arguments. But again, student.Scores is expanded. Therefore, the call to some function is actually of this form. Finally, this expression simply expands to a concatenation of all the elements of the scores fields. Let's look at the horizontal concatenation example in a little more detail. As we've learned, the expression student.Scores is really shorthand for this comma-separated list of three objects with two commas. In this case, the three objects all happen to be 1x4 double arrays. If we add an additional layer of square brackets, notice there's one extra open square bracket on the left and one extra closed square bracket on the right. This is a valid Matlab expression, and its value is a 1x12 array. Therefore, by placing square brackets around student.Scores, we obtain a valid Matlab expression whose value in this case is simply the 1x12 array. This 1x12 array, which represents three individual students test scores on 4 different tests is a good opportunity to motivate the use of the command reshape. The first 4 elements of this 1 by 12 array are the test scores from student 1. The next 4 elements are the test scores of student 2, and the last 4 elements are the test scores of student 3. Rather than a 1 by 12 array, a 4 by 3 or 3 by 4 array of these scores would be very natural to have. Here's the 4 by 3 case, where the tests go down and the students go across the top. This is actually very easy to generate from the 1 by 12 array, since the order in memory of the data is identical. Notice that the first 4 elements in both arrays are students 1 test scores from 1 to 4. The next 4 elements in memory of both arrays are students 2 test scores from 1 to 4. And finally, the last 4 elements in memory are students 3 scores from 1 to 4. Therefore, reshaping the 1 by 12 array into a dimension 4 by 3 array exactly achieves this goal. It's important to notice that the square brackets are there so that student.Scores, when expanded, is horizontally concatenated to the 1 by 12 array. And then the reshape takes care of changing the shape. The other orientation is a little bit different. First, it can be obtained simply by transposing the result we just obtained. But it can also be obtained in a more simple manner. Notice that the first row is simply the scores of student 1. The second row is the scores of student 2. And finally, the third row is the scores of student 3. Therefore, this is a vertical concatenation of the individual score vector from each student. That means that a call like this will generate this array. I'd like you to think very carefully about why the square brackets are used in the reshape approaches, but not in the vertical concatenation approach. Try all this in Matlab on your own and make sure you understand the concepts being introduced.